Hey, I'm Sarah, and this is the Goddess in Training podcast. This isn't about being perfect or polished or having it all figured out. This is about what happens when you actually start listening to your body, your intuition, your patterns, your truth. I'm asking big questions and having real conversations, sometimes messy and sometimes magical, with people who've lived through it, grown through it, and still don't have all the answers. If you've ever doubted yourself, betrayed your gut, or wondered if you're the only one, you're not. Let's talk about it. Hi everyone, welcome back to Goddess in Training. I'm your host, Sarah, and today's episode is all about the body, how it holds, how it heals, and how it whispers to us through intuition. My guest is Emily Webb Olson, a licensed psychotherapist and somatic yoga teacher whose trauma-informed work blends the science of polyvagal theory with the sacred practice of listening inward. We met recently at a conference, and within minutes, I knew I needed to bring her onto the podcast. Her approach is both grounded and deeply intuitive, weaving together the nervous system, the chakras, ancestral healing, and the power of breath to support people in coming home to themselves. In this conversation, we talk about how trauma creates disconnection from the body and how yoga can help us return, the difference between pushing and surrendering and personal growth, what it means to feel your intuition in your cells, and how emotions, even the messy ones, can become portals to self-trust. We also explore generational patterns, womb wisdom, and how parenting with nervous system awareness can be a healing journey all on its own. This is a rich and compassionate conversation for anyone who's ever felt out of sync with their body or unsure of what it's trying to say. Emily's insights will inspire you to slow down, breathe deep, and start listening. Let's dive in. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Goddess in Training podcast. Emily and I met a few weeks ago at a conference and started talking about her practice of somatic yoga, and I just was really excited to share her expertise and her background with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into being both a psychotherapist and a somatic yoga practitioner, and then also let the listeners know, what is somatic yoga?
Sure. So actually the road to me becoming a psychotherapist was a long road. I took a lot of wrong turns, or I don't know if I would call them wrong turns, but just I was on some different career paths and found out that one of the things that I loved about all of them was really working in smaller groups or one-on-one with people. I found that really, lit me up. I found like that was where my passion was. I went to school to be a teacher, and the big classroom was too much for me. So shout out to all teachers. You have a very difficult job. I admire and appreciate you very much.
Yes.
And I just, I was doing my student teaching, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, it just didn't feel right for me. And so then several years later, I wanted to be a college admissions counselor. So I wanted to help people into college, but fell in love with adventure therapy.
Adventure therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's using like the outside world and using that as kind of an experience, and then taking that experience and integrating it into your healing, right?
Okay.
And so I worked with a school for adolescent females, and that is where I learned all of the amazing therapy that I learned. So brain spotting, EMDR, a lot of different things, like things that I didn't even dream of in my program, of all these like cool tools that you could use with people. Mm-hmm. And that's where I learned about, feeling things in the body, so your somatic experiences. And then again, lots of different turns on my therapy wheel. And then when I started doing my own yoga practice, and as I was doing yoga one time, especially in 2020, that was like, I know it was a big year for everyone. And during 2020, like I started realizing how much the yoga was helping me and how much it was helping me stay in my body. Because during that time, and I don't know about for everyone else, but during that time, it was really hard to stay in my body. Everything was changing, everything was going on. I had two littles at home. They were really little, they couldn't go, you know, and I was a clinical supervisor with my job. And so trying to navigate everything was just really challenging. And so once I did that, I was like, wow, these go together so well. And I did my yoga teacher training in Richmond. And there were other mental health professionals in the training too. So we would communicate and talk about how much they just overlap and how important they are. And last year, about March, I was like, I'm gonna move. I wanted to come back here. I originally grew up in the mountains and really missed it and came back here. I was like, I'm gonna move. I'm gonna open a space that combines both yoga and mental health and, you know, just allow people to have another avenue of supporting themselves.
Amazing. Yeah. That's wonderful. I think this space too in the mountains, I've only been here for a year. There's just something really magical and peaceful about it that you can feel in your body. Yeah.
I mean, and it's so different. So from like being in Richmond, again, Richmond's amazing, beautiful, love it. But I really could, like I could feel as soon as we would get closer and I could see the peaks of Otter, it was like, I could breathe again. And so I just knew that it was meant for me to come back to this area.
Yeah, I have the same experience. I spend a lot of time in Costa Rica, and as you go south toward the bigger mountains and the bigger trees, it's like this lifting off of you. I mean, all of Costa Rica is beautiful, but that South Pacific side, it just, there's just something about it that you can't really put into words. Going back to something that you said about COVID, I'm interested to dig into a little bit this idea of us not being in our bodies during that period of time. And what popped to mind too was our bodies were kind of the enemy at that time because it was illness. It was our bodies that were preventing us from connecting with other people in person. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Stephen Porges, who created the polyvagal theory, he really has like a great definition of trauma, and I'm going to kind of butcher it a little bit, so please, you know, see the whole definition. But he really talks about trauma as a disconnect from our connection. And during COVID, we had this huge disconnect from our normalcy. Then we had a disconnect from people, and then we also had this disconnect from our bodies of we don't know what's happening. The fear of the unknown is a big, massive existential fear. And so, and there's the hard part with existential fears is they're massive. So there's not like, you know, clear cut things that you can do. And so during that time, also, when you think about it too, as a collective, everyone was going through the same thing, which in one way brings us together in that collective, but in another way, we were so isolated. And as humans, we have this like innate need to connect. And, you know, at least from my experience, and I know it's different for others, but in my experience, it was the things that used to make me feel better, I could no longer do, right? So going and connecting with girlfriends and having a conversation, right? You couldn't do. Going and meeting with family, you couldn't do, you know, really any of the different things that we used to bring us connection or closer, we weren't able to do. And so I think a lot of times we got really into our head and whenever we're solely focused on our mind and not on our body, we tend to struggle.
Yeah, definitely. And I like to tell people too that when talking about intuition, fear is an intuition killer. Doubt is an intuition killer. That was a period of time when we were just full of fear and full of doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still remember, again, I had really little kids at the time, and I remember there was no hand sanitizer, there was no toilet paper. So it's kind of like, how do I protect these people and also keep myself safe? And so it was just, yeah, it was a really tough time. I'm sure for, tough time for everyone, but just again, trying to make those decisions and checking in with yourself of like, am I making the right decision?
Yeah. So much doubt. So talk a little bit more about how yoga opened something up in you during that period of time.
So really, there's two main things that I can remember. The first one is that I realized it's not pushing harder, it's surrendering. So I think prior to my yoga teacher training, I was always like, oh, I gotta like push harder so I can get into this headstand, so I can like make this pose look perfect, so I can, do all these different things. And then once I did the yoga teacher training, and I had a fantastic teacher, and he really taught a lot of the philosophy, which was fantastic. And when I still remember I was doing a humble warrior pose, and it's like such an offering of release. And in that moment, I just sobbed so much because instead of like pushing harder, I was surrendering to like, because, doing the yoga teacher training, it's intense. I was working full time. I also had my children. And so like trying to juggle everything. And it's just like, no, just surrender to the moment and be here in this space. And he did a fantastic job of holding space. And so he would hold the space while you kind of experienced what you did. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful, right? It's nothing new. All of this has been around for thousands of years. So it's not like a new kind of thing, but setting the intention behind what you're doing makes the biggest difference. And another moment I remember, he said, like, tell yourself that that you love yourself. And I was 39 at the time. I'd never told myself that I loved myself. Right? And like I immediately cried, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And even at the time, I don't think I felt it. I mean, I think like I realized that was something that I needed to work on, that was not, not full yet. But now I can like totally tell myself like, I love you, and like really feel it. And it's beautiful.
Yeah. I think so many of these practices, the surrender piece is just absolutely key, but also I think it's a remembering. We who we really are, and then you can dig into past lives, but you don't have to, because it's really just like who we are at our essence, and what we are is love.
Absolutely. And again, I think with the yoga teaching, it just really drove that point home, and I could really feel it in my body, and really, again, I have that logical part of my brain that will sometimes be like, but once I started like feeling it too, then that put the connection together, and I was like, no, yeah, this is the right direction.
So how do you now balance your background in psychotherapy, which can be very analytical and logical, with this somatic body work? How do you balance those two things in your practice?
That's a really great question. My practice has changed a lot, and I've been practicing for 15 years as a therapist, and I would say, one of the biggest things is, and when I first started, it was more about kind of like feeling this intense pressure of, figuring it out, right? And now I don't have that, because that's not my responsibility, right? Like my responsibility is to guide, right? And so I guide individuals to learning, to coming back and learn, like you said, the remembering, to come back to remembering themselves. So the therapy that I provide allows a person to really check in with the body. But I think it's helpful having the science backed behind it, because it's important to know, like, okay, why can some people make good choices in relationships, and why can't I make good choices in relationships, right? Like, why is it that I keep finding myself in these same patterns, or why, why do I people please? Why do, and so it is helpful to have some psychoeducation and understanding that your nervous system, I think a lot of times we beat ourselves up of like, oh, why did I respond that way? But your nervous system, is not controllable. Our first initial reaction is not. It's subconscious. It's just ingrained in our brain, and we can come back and then we can do things to kind of help it, and then retrain our brain and change the neural pathway, which is really cool that we can do that. Mm-hmm. And so I have all that I love for science. But I see so much about how you need both, right? You need like that love aspect, because just because doesn't mean that you can feel it, right? So like, just because I know that I tend to be a people pleaser doesn't mean that I can't, feel it. And I can feel it in real time now of when I'm doing that, right? And then I can take a step back, I can take a couple breaths, and then I can make a different choice. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it changes my reaction, right? Like when there's conflict, I can feel it in my body, right? Like my heart races, my face might get flushed, my hands might get sweaty, right? But that's my nervous system. That's not my choice, right? Like I'm not making the choice to do that. And I think we beat ourselves up so much for that. Right? And so it is an awareness of, okay, my nervous system is going off right now. And why is that? Oh, because this person is angry right now. And that sets my nervous system into fight or flight, right? And if I can breathe and I can talk to myself and I can, one of the things I do in therapy is help people with resourcing, which is our brain thinks in symbols, so our subconscious thinks in symbols. So if we can find a symbol that can help ourselves calm back down too. So I have the ocean's always really special to me. So when I get that way, I'll imagine the ocean, I'll do some breaths, and then it will help me kind of calm myself back down. And then I can make a choice, but it's no longer a choice that's connected to my nervous system response. It's a choice that I get to make, right? So if I want to, help settle down that angry person, I can do that. Or if I can be like, no, the best thing for me to do is walk away, then I can walk away. But again, it's a choice out of that versus choice out of fear.
Yeah, yeah. So as you're working with people, and so many of the feelings that we have in our body can mean many different things. Like that nervousness in your gut could be excitement, or it could be anxiety. And so much of it, I think, is like kind of what you're alluding to, like the framing that we put around it and taking power and control over those feelings that we don't have control over. Talk a little bit more about that and how people can better learn those signals in their body, better learn how to interpret them and work with them.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always say is that emotions are messengers. They're not meant to cause us pain, right? Like they're not the enemy. I think a lot of times people think emotions are an enemy, and so we want to push them away, right? But really, and a lot of my clients will recognize this because I talk about how we want to let them in and kind of let them move, because we don't want them to get stuck either, right? There's like there's a metaphor of a guest house, right? So we don't want to keep them at bay. We also don't want them to stay.
Yeah.
Right? So we want to kind of like let them come in, let them be guests, but let them go on their way. And they tell us things. And if we kind of sit, and again, here's a hard part too, is sometimes we tend to like want to know why, you know,
right.
And sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes we might, right? But sometimes, like the other day, I woke up and I was just really agitated and I had no idea why, right? And so, what I've learned is that if I just, sit in that for a little bit, breathe, and try not to put my agitation on my people, right? Like,
Yeah.
sometimes it just it happens to go there, but I try
Yeah.
hard not to put it on other people. And I try really hard to navigate it. And I'll journal, right? Like I might journal. That's a great way of just kind of, again, you want to stay curious, not judgmental. So instead of beating myself up and being like, ugh, Emily, like, why do you keep doing this? You're, like, look at what you're doing. You're being so like grumpy. Don't be grumpy, right? But instead of that, I'm able to kind of say like, yeah, this is interesting. I don't know what's going on, right? And I breathe through it. And then usually you'll get out of the emotion, right? Now, that doesn't mean you won't go back in it again for a little bit. And even though I never knew why I was agitated that morning, maybe it was coffee related, maybe not, whatever. But either way, I was able to kind of work through it, and it doesn't get stuck, right? And stuckness is hard, and that's where instead of being able to kind of breathe through something and kind of navigate it, it's a little bit more challenging to work through.
When I was coming out of my divorce and I had been through a lot of trauma, not only when I felt emotion was I blaming myself and questioning, my response was such that I would look for an external source. And normally it was like the thing that was right in front of me, like, well, why am I feeling this way? Well, I must be feeling this way because of this person, something that person did yesterday or just a few minutes before. And I think that's a common response for people to look in their near vision and try to find a reason for the feeling that they experience. Can you talk a little bit about that and just in general how trauma can affect what we're feeling in our bodies and how we process those feelings?
Great question. And yes, so we all have defense mechanisms, right? Like, and that comes from trauma, that comes from, disconnect in relationships, that comes from all sorts of different things, right? So in reality, people pleasing is a defense mechanism, and it's so that I can control what people see so that people will like me, right?
Been there, yes, yes. That is very familiar to me.
So it is, and then like, at first, when I first learned that, I was like, oh, no way, not me, right?
Because you want people to perceive, and you want to perceive yourself as a good person. Yeah.
Right, right. And again, that's where that curiosity versus judgment is so helpful, because then you can kind of see when you're like, remember I was talking about that conflict with that person, then it's no longer about my defense mechanism of like, I need you to like me, right? So then it becomes more of, I get to make a choice based off what is in my best interest.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's hard. So defense mechanisms are really difficult to notice on your own, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it's really helpful to have just an outside guide, someone that you trust, someone that like has your best interest. Now, you don't want someone who's going to that's going to be rude or mean about it, right? It needs to be in a compassionate, my mentor and I have this term called compassionately firm, right? Which is very much like, I love you and I need you to notice that you're stuck in this pattern, right? And here is how it's helping you, but here is how it's hurting you. Because typically we stay in patterns, even though they're terrible and we don't like them, we're getting something from them. And again, it's very difficult to consciously know, because usually it's our subconscious.
Right.
And with trauma, trauma changes, and we all experience trauma, like big T's, little t's, all sorts of different t's, right? Because again, Stephen Porges talks about like trauma is basically the disconnect of the connection. And so when you think about that we can be disconnected from higher power, we can be disconnected from our bodies, we can be disconnected from, partners, children, countries, we can be disconnected from our home. I love that definition because I think it gives such a wide range, because I think trauma is a hot button topic at the moment, and it's very difficult to explain, and I'll have lots of people that will come in and be like, well, I don't have any trauma. I'm like, well, everybody has, you know, there's really, we can't escape childhood without having some type of trauma. Now, it doesn't mean that we have like the adverse childhood experiences, which are ACEs, and they're like, you know, the textbook definition of like what childhood trauma is. But again, like I'm going like this because it's very limited when it can be much more different, right?
And everybody can benefit from the tools that are utilized, whether you have big T trauma or little t trauma.
Yes.
Yeah, they're all the same, and we can all benefit.
Trauma really does rewire your brain. When we're first born, right, like we're taught that our connection is safe, right? But for people who experience trauma, especially if your caregiver was neglectful or inconsistent, then your perception is not to look for love and connection. Your perception is to look for danger. So like what you see is different. It's almost like you have like a different colored lens, and instead of seeing things as like, oh, look at all these amazing people to connect with, it's like, ooh, look at all these people who are going to hurt me.
Yeah.
And that's, again, rewiring the brain. And it is possible. It doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, right? Like it doesn't mean that, because there is no perfect, but it doesn't mean that your initial reaction isn't going to be the one that you've already had, but you can be able to challenge it, kind of like we were talking about a little bit before about taking a moment and then making the choice instead of out of fear, out of love for yourself and love for the other person.
Yeah, my brain went to a place thinking about big T trauma. My family did foster care when I was growing up, and so we had babies in and out of the house throughout my childhood who were bounced around to different foster homes, who had traumatic things happen when they were infants, things that they couldn't remember, babies who were born drug affected, and that was definitely their experience of the world, that even if they were less than 6 months old when these things happened, and even if you start providing that stability later on in their infanthood, that is still imprinted on them. Yeah,
absolutely.
And so we don't have to remember the trauma either.
Right.
And so even if somebody is like, well, I don't have trauma, they just may not remember those moments where they became disconnected.
Yeah. So the therapy that I provide actually allows you to go into the remembering because it's stored in your body.
Yeah.
Right. So even if you don't quite remember, and this is common, like a lot of times I'll get people who will be like, I know that my childhood wasn't great, but I don't remember. Right. And that's by design. Like our brains do that by design. So my background is working with adoption and foster care. So I have like attachment and trauma are my specialty.
Okay.
And so when I work with individuals, what we'll do is we'll go back in utero and do some remembering there. And for my adoptees, that tends to be one of the most beautiful experiences because, again, a lot of times with adoption, you don't know your adoption story, right? So, I mean, you know, but especially with international adoptions, you just really don't know. So you can kind of go back through, and I've worked with an individual one time whose birth mother was going through war, right? And so the individual inside could feel what was happening to the mother at that time. And so it was just, and so working through that aspect was not only a connection that they suddenly felt with their birth mother, which was beautiful, but also they felt this, understanding, right, of what was happening in that moment, and also helped heal that generational trauma, right? Because especially war, that tends to have like a really intense impact generationally.
Yeah, and what is it that the eggs that become us were actually inside of our grandmothers. And so when you talk about generational impacts, like literally our cells were there at a time when they probably, if our grandparents are still alive, they probably don't even remember. And so all of those things can, it makes logical sense that it can live inside the body.
Yeah.
So are there places in the body that that hold these traumas more than other places? Or do you see unusual places where people can be holding these things?
Really cool question. Really, people hold things all over, right? But what you'll see a lot of times is the chakras are really connected to where people hold things, especially, inability to speak. People will hold things very much in their throats. And so that is another reason why I really love yoga too, of being able to use yoga, work with the different chakras and help people release what they need to release from the throat. One of the best ways to get it out is kind of like in yoga, it's a lion's breath. And it's just like, opening the mouth and right? And that's it's so empowering, right? It's so empowering, and it's also like releasing. Again, the therapy and the yoga are so beautiful at being able to help get what gets stuck out of the body, right? And to release it or to just move it, right? And so that was another thing is sometimes, when we start with something, so I always start with what are you feeling in the body? Where do you feel that? And we usually connect it to a particular feeling, right? So if you are feeling unheard or just, unseen or not appreciated, or you feel not confident, that's a big one, right? So if we don't feel confident enough to use our voice, that's where we'll start and we'll kind of connect. And sometimes it will move down, right? Or sometimes, usually, a lot of it tends to be in this area. So, and sometimes we'll hold things in our mind, but that tends to be our cognitive, logical kind of thing. Or block or defense mechanism or whatever you want to call it. It's just kind of, sometimes it's easier to think versus feel. And so sometimes we'll start up in the head and then we'll move down into the body. And, and sometimes it's kind of, we work with an object, right? So maybe it's like, I feel like the stickiness in my throat. And the therapy that I do, it's called CRM, Comprehensive Resource Model, and it allows you to go into your subconscious. So then so maybe in the throat it feels sticky and it feels like just grossness. And so we'll kind of connect with what that feels like. And then sometimes we can just break through it through breath and movement and get rid of that, and that ends up being able to help someone go even deeper. Because again, we all have defense mechanisms. Some of them are conscious, a lot of them are unconscious, and so there's just different navigational tools to be able to get through.
So is there a really strange place that you've seen somebody hold trauma in their bodies?
Knees.
Okay.
Right? So, jaw tends to be one for anger, right? But people hold them in their knees. What are some other interesting ones? One person had one in their big toe.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so, and actually what's cool about that one is it ended up being trauma not from their lifetime, but from a generational trauma. And one of their ancestors died from an abscessed toe.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Wow.
And then so once they were able to kind of make that connection, and then the toe felt better, and then they didn't. I know, right? So sometimes it can be kind of like just really interesting, but there's usually some sort of connection, right? And sometimes people want to go there and sometimes people don't. I think it just depends on the individual and what they're interested in.
Yeah, what their path is. I think all healing is self-healing. What we're helping is unlock something in somebody else and allow them to heal themselves. And so sometimes they're ready and sometimes they're not. And for whatever reason, the toe needed to be unlocked.
Right. And that, and I think just being able to realize that and to feel the freedom of no longer having it was again, it's the body feeling it. It just feels so much better. You feel so much lighter. You feel so much at peace, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's such a wonderful gift to be able to give to people. So moving away from trauma a little bit, I believe that the body can also help us unlock positive things, creativity.
Yes.
And so for me in particular, like I've had a lot of experiences where there's been a lot of symbolism around my womb and creation. Can you talk a little bit about that and experiences that you've had working with people in a way that's really empowering, that opens up, that unlocks beautiful things in their lives?
So again, what's really cool about CRM is that, I mean, yes, we talk about the trauma part, but there's so many gifts and resources, so we call them all resources,
I like
that you get from ancestors. And there's this beautiful grid process of connecting with your ancestors and asking them for the resource that they want to give for maybe the problem that you're having. So for example, I did one that was just a traditional generational grid. There wasn't any target distress or anything like that. It was just a lovely resource grid, because you can do that too. And I connected with a young child. I connected with a hill woman, or a woman from Appalachia, which is like my community. I connected with a willow tree. I connected with a gentleman from Scotland. So like all of these different ancestors, and what they gave me was something different in each one, but you connect them together within your body and it integrates that system into you. So, I mean, I think I did that maybe 7 years ago, but I can still feel that, because what it does is it groups it together and gives you the resource, and then where you feel it in your body, right? And so I connected it in my heart, which is why I'm constantly, I feel like sometimes touching it, but I feel such a connection. And the hill woman was, her resource was resiliency. And whenever I feel like, oh, I just can't do this anymore, this is so hard, why am I doing this, then she comes to me and I connect with that gift of her resiliency. Because again, I don't know technically who that woman was, but I know that my family, I have on both sides of my family, we have strong roots in the Appalachian region. And so I know that she is somewhere in there. And it doesn't, for me, it wasn't as important although I did try to do some research, but, because my logical brain just can't not do that. But like this woman was just so fantastic. And she just comes to me, and she's, I call her mama, right? And she just, takes care of me sometimes when I need it.
It just reminds me that the power of stories, and that whether the story is true or not, it really doesn't matter. And that's something that I've been leaning into with my Goddess in Training. The podcast and my writing is calling upon these mythical goddesses, because these stories, they can really help us connect and feel, and then you start feeling it in your body, and that's where it's imprinted.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about how, when something is pulled into your body, sometimes I feel things like literally in my cells, and that's the time that I've really had major transformations, is when I can feel it kind of like infused in all of my cells. You can talk a little bit about the science around that, or and also your own personal experience with that.
So when we're recreating the neural pathway, right, we are changing the whole system, right? So it is changing the brain, but you are changing the DNA, because you're changing that response, and you're healing in such a cellular level, so that you are changing the generational DNA, right? So that it can be able to be passed down to your generation in different forms. When I work with people, is we also, after we have these big, massive changes, we do need repetition, right? So I always give homework, right? And where we look affects how we feel. And so when we have distress eye spots, and then we have like really good resource eye spots that feel really good. And so one of the tools that we do is once we have this big moment, we find our new truth and we find the eye position that's connected to that, and then we'll practice. And so then, and again, this is where it's led by the individual of how much they want to practice. But I give them the things that they, I'm saying like, let's look at this eye position. I think you should practice that one. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it'll be a geometric shape, mm-hmm. right? Because again, remember, our brain is so symbolic, and it's kind of like the same way with our dreams, right? Like there's so many symbols, so many geometric shapes, and the world is geometric shapes, right? Uh-huh. So our connection. And so sometimes our new truth is a geometric shape, but it really does alter us. And then the cool part is like, you'll notice that it'll alter your environment too. I like to think of it as like you're tossing a pebble, and then the ripples just get bigger and bigger. And so it's really neat to see how, as you grow, you're actually having your whole environment grow.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how people that you've worked with, how their relationships have benefited from the work that they've done.
Yeah. So again, their relationship with their self is the main priority. It's learning to trust yourself. It's learning to trust, in your choices and your decisions. And it's learning to make choices not based off of what other people need you to make, but what you need to make for yourself. So sometimes it causes you to change your relationships, right? So sometimes it might be there was a relationship that's just no longer serving you. And so because you're empowering yourself and you're understanding yourself, you feel more comfortable making those choices.
Right.
But then a lot of times too, especially I see the biggest with our immediate relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And so once we feel good about ourselves too, we can also, again, we can communicate that to other people and encourage other people. We just have a better way of communicating. And so, and we can understand more about like their response to me it's a projection, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not a true evaluation of me, it's an evaluation of themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge thing, to not take things personally, mm-hmm. right? And so then that helps relationships in that aspect. And then also it can free up, it gets rid of those defense responses. So it allows you to have a more open heart, which allows other people to, again, you can't control other people, but if you have an open heart, especially with children, right? Like children love open hearts. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to want to connect more, right? And so it's just a way of opening yourself up, but you'll also have that awareness of if this individual or person is no longer serving me, mm-hmm. It won't feel like, oh,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what are some day-to-day practices that you do and that you do with your children too? What are some things that people can do to help strengthen their relationships with their kids and help their kids connect with their bodies and move through emotion? Because there's so much emotion when you're a child.
Oh, yeah. Oh my goodness, yes, very much. I've got a 6 and an 8-year-old, so we're in big emotions.
16 is another big emotional time.
I'm totally aware of that for sure. I'm just like, oh, okay. So one of the biggest things is to let them feel how they feel. You don't have to fix it. And what I'm constantly talking to my kids is just like, you do have to redirect, right? Like we can't punch, we can't hit, so you do have to have some redirection. But you're allowed to be angry, mm-hmm. right? You're allowed to be angry right now. And breathing is one of the simplest things, but it's the most effective, mm-hmm. especially for kids. Now, mm-hmm. sometimes my kids will be like, I don't want to breathe. Yeah. And I'm like, I get it, buddy. Yeah. And then sometimes, because again, it's kind of like, it's the same thing for us, right? When we're dysregulated, we're not making our best choices either. And so when kids are dysregulated, they're not in their thinking brain, they're in their like fight flight, right? They're they're not conscious of making good choices. And so it's teaching kids and adults, because surprisingly a lot of adults are on the same playing field as a lot of kids, because we weren't taught that, right? For me, I know that I was taught to like go up to my room, right? And just, go up to your room, and when you're feeling better, come back down, right? And so what that really taught me was that my emotions are shameful, right? No one wants to be around my emotions, even though I know that wasn't my mom's, desired outcome.
Right.
But that was what was, that's what my brain wrapped around. And so for the longest time, I like wouldn't have emotions. And then, I learned that no, emotions are really like, they can be a superpower. They tell you so many things about your intuition. And so that's what I really try to teach my kids, is that emotions are a superpower. We just kind of have to learn what they're telling us, or, how to navigate them and let them be. But again, that guest house, right? We let them be, but then we want them to move on, right? And again, some emotions stick around a little bit longer. Grief is one of those ones that sticks around for a while, for sure. But one of the daily practices that I do is I love a good mantra, right? And that's something else, like when I was talking about the new truth that you discover, that can be your mantra. Or in yoga, there's a japa meditation, which you do for 40 days. And I like to find like a new one every 40 days.
Oh, wow.
I don't do long, right? Like 20 minutes, right? Some people can do longer, and totally whatever feels right in your body.
20 minutes seems long to me. But I could do 5.
But 5 is great. Like anything, it's the repetition that is what your brain needs. So when your brain starts going into fight or flight, if you have done the repetition, it's like muscle memory. It's so much quicker to get it back to you than if you don't practice. And then it's just, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It's just harder to pull it back in sometimes. So I do that. I also, one of the things that I've started doing is, 3 times a day of just kind of checking in with myself, right? And it's also a practice of, and I like to think, again, I have that logical scientific part. So I kind of look at myself sometimes like an experiment of like a 0 to 10, right, of the intensity of what I'm feeling, right? So the other morning when I was feeling agitated, it was an 8, which is pretty high, and like, and I like, it just, I could just feel this agitation everywhere, like a lot of excess energy. And like, where am I feeling it in my body, right? Like, am I feeling it in my hands? Am I feeling it in my chest? Am I feeling it in my stomach? And so I'll write down, I love a journal, right? So always carrying like a journal with me. And so I'll just jot it down. And again, it's not for criticism or judgment of myself. It's more for, what's going on? This is interesting. Like, I'm feeling agitated at an 8, right? And then I'll also do that with good feelings, you know? So remembering not just focusing on the negative, because where we focus
Exactly.
tends to be where we go. So,
and it grows. Yeah.
It does.
Where we put our energy grows. Yeah.
And so I try to do positive ones too. Like the other day, I saw a bunch of different birds. I love birds. Birds are my favorite. And there was a bluebird, and then there was a little yellow chickadee, and then so it was like these beautiful bright colored birds, and I felt so good, and I was like, I feel peaceful, and it was like at an 8. And so just again being able to navigate and notice, and where do I feel that? Well, I feel it in my heart, and it's this warm, just and I see colors too, so it's like a warm yellowy, just like honey is kind of what it makes me think of, right? And so I'll just jot down that, and sometimes I'll come back to them, and I'll remember different pieces, and sometimes I can see a bigger picture, or sometimes I can see a bigger message in the small little details, right? But it's hard for my brain to keep track of everything.
Yeah.
And so by writing it down lets me see. And sometimes when you're in the sadness or in the anger or in the more negative, emotions, and they're not really negative, just people tend to not like them as much. And so when we're in those, it's good to also remember we have positive ones too. And so sometimes when we're here, it can get so dark and so clouded that it's harder for us to see some of the positive emotions.
So what are some other practical things that people can do to regulate themselves, to work more with their bodies and to work more with their emotions and to live a better, happier, more peaceful life?
So I really encourage people to find like a team, right? Because it's not just a one-stop shop, right? Like you really want to try and find, different things that make your body feel good. And it could be, finding a great yoga studio. It could be finding, a therapist. Like I have my own team. I have my own therapist. I have a woman who, she's just a mentor and a fantastic person. And so I just enjoy connecting with her. I have my yoga community. I have my study groups. I have like a lot of different people that I can, get information from. And the other thing is discernment. You are the expert of you. I cannot stress, you are the expert of you, right? And, no one else is that expert. And I think a lot of times we tend to, especially I know with therapy, it seems like this, this all-powerful person, right? But in reality, like, I don't know what you're feeling inside. I can help guide you and help you ask some questions, but I can never tell you what you're feeling. I can never tell you about your experience. I can give you some psychoeducation, right? But again, you are the expert of you. And I think sometimes we tend to just forget that and try and, and there's no one quick fix.
No.
Right?
I wish. Everyone wishes.
Right? Yes. Magic wand, and then it's just,
But there's so many different paths, which is the beauty.
So many different paths. And there's, and that's the journey of life, and that's the joy is, and growth is more like a spiral going up versus like this. I think so many times people are like, oh, I thought I was doing so well. And I even had that moment a couple of days ago when I was doing some work. I was like, I thought I worked on that. And my therapist was like, oh, we'll be working on this for as long as you want. Right? And it's true, because I think, and we don't have to like steamroll it, right? We can go forward, we can take a break. Again, healing is not meant to be like a forward steamroll. I think it's supposed to be taking a break, because the best kind of way to see about our healing is to be out in the world and notice what happens in that moment, right? So, you do a lot of great work and you feel awesome, and then you step out and then you connect with people and they test you, right? And so, and that's what we want, right?
Right.
And sometimes you'll fall backwards, and then you'll have to step and go forward, but it's part of the journey and part of the beauty of life.
Exactly. So what's next for you? What are you excited about that's coming up?
Well, in June, I'm headed to Denver for the psychedelic conference.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to go.
Oh my gosh, I'm super excited.
And we didn't talk about psychedelics.
No.
We could have a whole nother conversation about that.
Yeah. Again,
I need to figure out a way how to go, but okay, I'm going to try to manifest that. Yeah. Okay.
You should. It's so, I don't know. It's just, there's a lot of opportunities there. And my mentor lives in Colorado. And so like, I'm just excited about being out there and having this whole other kind of realm for trauma work, right? There's a lot of great research too that's being done with veterans and first responders and women. One of the biggest changes for women is right after we we have children, right? It's like our bodies are different. They have changed. Mm-hmm. And so whatever we experienced in childhood, unfortunately, comes rearing back up at that time period.
Yes.
So it's really hard for new moms. And so there's a lot of new research. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. If there's a workshop or a session that talks about
like utilizing psychedelics in postpartum. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. If I had had that resource, because psychedelics have changed my life profoundly, and if I had utilized them at that time, it opens you up to be more connected. And motherhood can be a very disconnecting time when you first have a baby, especially. I didn't have any community, any family nearby, and you feel so alone while all of this past stuff is being thrown at you, while you're trying to keep this infant alive.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so challenging, and that's one thing with Big Oak Wellness that we're trying to really do is focus on that population. Just so even if they don't have the community within their family or the community within their friend group, there are other opportunities where they can gain that community.
Yeah, it's so critical. And that's great that you're providing those resources. Anything else that you're excited for?
Well, with Big Oak, as we're continuing to grow, I have 2 counselors. They're doing virtual, but they also have a very similar background. One specializes in EMDR and one's an art therapist. And the art therapist actually works with postnatal women and postpartum, and she has this beautiful kind of like if that's something that you're interested in, that's a great way, because sometimes it can be hard to talk, right? And so being able to express yourself through art is a way that she's really enjoyed working with people who are experiencing trauma. So that's her specialty. And then I'm bringing on some individuals who are going to be doing more yoga. So I'll still be doing my somatic class, but I'll have other individuals who will be doing some yen. So yen's another really great one to, because you have to hold a pose for an extended period of time and you breathe through it. So it's a surrender versus a push, right? And so, and as you breathe, you allow yourself to get more space. And it's just a really cool practice that you can connect with that too. And then I'll have another yoga teacher who's doing a prenatal and postnatal yoga group. So, but those will all be coming too. So I am excited about the growth of the business.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's way more than I'd anticipated a year ago back in March. I was like, oh, it'll just be me.
Okay. But, wow, that's a huge amount of growth in a short period of time. That's so wonderful. And so for all the listeners, so it sounds like whether you are here in the Roanoke Valley or elsewhere, there are resources at bigoakwellness.com, right? Is that the right web address? And it'll also be in the show notes too, so please check it out. Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Sarah.
This was so fun. And I am thinking about some additional conversations that we should have. And also I would love to talk to the person doing art. I think that's so fascinating as well. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for tuning in to Goddess in Training. I hope something in this episode stirred your knowing or softened your heart. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it, or leave a review or comment to help others find us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more conversations like this, please consider supporting Goddess in Training on Patreon. For more tools and offerings to deepen your intuition practice, visit goddessintraining.online. You can also join the Scroll of Sashat on Substack for twice-weekly stories of how I followed my intuition. The music for Goddess in Training is Madre Ayahuasca by Arkawa, and you can find more of his music in the link to his website in the show notes. Remember, your intuition is not a mystery, it's a memory. Keep listening.
Madre Ayahuasca, resplandor de fuego, estrellita, tabaco santo, fuerza de rapé, soplo de luz, soplo encantado, viajecito, bendición. bendición del cielo, fortaleza, tigrecito de la selva, madre haya